maybe have something more. I don't know. We'll see.
Now we move on to Europe. Germany's Munich Airport reported that several drone sightings late on Thursday evening, which forced air traffic control to suspend operations, which has resumed for now. The airspace disruption has led to the cancellation of 17 flights and impacted nearly 3,000 passengers who were provided with camp beds, blankets, and food. Another 15 arriving flights were also diverted to other cities, including Stuttgart, Nuremberg, Vienna, and Frankfurt. Authorities have further said that the size and type of drones were sighted type could not be determined due to darkness. Police too have not provided further details. However, the airport has now reopened on Friday morning after the overnight closure. The incident has prompted sharp responses from European leaders at the Copenhagen summit. EU officials have backed plans to strengthen the bloc's defenses against drones. This latest incident at Munich Airport comes amid a series of similar drone sightings across Europe, which have temporarily shut airports in Denmark and Norway and has raised broader security concerns. This airspace disruption has heightened concern about the vulnerability of critical infrastructure in Europe. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Shruti Das Gupta. She's an international affairs expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Shruti, for joining us. Good to see you. Now, how is this growing number of drone sightings across Europe impacting the development of measures for new security measures and defense measures at airports and critical infrastructure?
Greetings, Asuma. Thank you so much for inviting me. Airports, as you've already mentioned, are part of the critical infrastructure of any nation. And the drone warfare that is continuously evolving has become a new menace for any nation. And it is difficult to control, identify, because they don't really have to come from across the borders. They can be brought in piecemeal, part by part, and assembled inside the nation, close to the situation itself, and then used against the national security infrastructure itself. So the drone warfare has triggered a new era of security measures, and this is exactly what Europe is now going to have to address when they find themselves at the mercy of drone sightings, and they're unsure of the origin, where they're coming from, what their intent is, what their capability is. So they need to now, not just the Europe as an entire body, but the world needs to now step up their game in terms of security infrastructure, where at least jammers and other infrastructure can be put in, identification can be done long distance of anything in the air and not just via the ATC. So everything needs to change up. The drone warfare has changed the way the world is about to interact with each other. No longer do we have to have heavy infrastructure development to be made, big weapons to be used against critical infrastructures. There can be a small drone and probably a kamikaze drone enough to bring a nation to its knees. So this is something that everybody needs to address. Now if I move on to the other part of your report and talk about what does it mean for Europe in the current context of the war in Europe, we need to, I can argue both sides of the coin. One, it could be Russia testing waters, seeing how the NATO response system is, whether if an escalation spreads from Ukraine to the rest of Europe, how Russia can ensure its interests and what is the level of engagement it can expect from these nations. On the other side of the coin, I can say it could be a mischief maker, probably Ukraine itself, trying to draw the other European nations into the war of Ukraine by posturing as a unknown, unidentified drone. And with the current high tensions running in Europe, everybody would definitely like to point the finger at Russia and trigger a NATO response rather than just a Ukraine response. So there are many facets to the sightings that are happening individually in many European nations. Mind you, none of them have ever identified it as a Russian threat which was used against the nation, despite the triggering of Article 4 by two nations of the NATO alliance itself. So let's be very objective about it. We are not sure of who is using these drones, but we do know that drones as a defensive or offensive mechanism is something that the entire world need to address now.
Yes, indeed. And given the slowness or slow speed of democratic countries, especially in European countries, about upgrading of their defense forces, how long do you think this will take for them to upgrade so that this kind of incidents maybe not happen or happen less, and also for the other countries in the world to follow the measures to protect their airports and infrastructure from such measures?
So despite there being a constant pull and push of powers across the world, in the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen three major wars. One which is currently enacting itself out in Europe in the region of Ukraine, where modern warfare can be easily identified. Ukraine themselves have done Operation Spiderweb against Russia and attacked their critical infrastructure deep into their territory. So that is a lesson that they can draw from. We're seeing exactly how Iran and Israel war happened, and the role played by these drones themselves in that particular warfare. Then we have seen exactly what happened during Operation Sindoor and how India themselves faced a deluge of drones, but they were jammed and they were left unexploded or even futile in the face of something like that. So there are lessons to be learned by each and every conflict that is happening across the world. And believe me, each and every defense organization is looking at them and learning via all of this. So although democratic nations need to go through a lot of policy changes, or they need the buying and of tenders, submission of tenders, and then enacting it is going to be a tedious process. But something, when it comes to the security of the nation, there are special clauses even in the most democratic of nations, including mine, that is India, where you can speed up your defense procurement by passing special needs and proving that it's entirely essential for the security of the nation. But the development of technology is very, very fast. So as fast as a countermeasure is developed, so does the next aggression wave comes through. So I think Europe themselves would have to question whether they are ready to tech up in their defensive mechanism as well as offensive mechanism as far as drone warfare is concerned.
And how do you assess, although Russia has denied any responsibility and interference of these drone attacks, how do you assess this current drone attacks and also the Russia and Ukraine situation and the war shifting European attention, and what can Europe do to maintain focus on Ukraine despite these provocations?
So exactly, I tried to address this point in a small way in the first question itself. In the context of Ukraine war, we need to understand that none of the nations that have raised the flags were ever able to prove that this aggression is coming from Russia. None of the drones were proved they were from Russia. In fact, a few of them were even proved to be coming from Ukraine. So there is a large amount of doubt that is floating in the entire analysis section of this geopolitical game that is flowing out. Russia may be testing waters. It did so during by flying its aircrafts near the zone in near Alaska, which triggered a response from the US military. So there is definitely a section which can be that Russia is testing waters to test response of the rest of the readiness and response of the NATO nations. But there is also a chance, because I do know, despite no matter what the Western media claims, I know that Ukraine is losing very, very badly. It is losing men. The amount of money being poured and resources being poured into the Ukraine war by the rest of the world just to keep Russia at bay is not succeeding. So the next step for Ukraine to survive would be to actively trigger a NATO response. That means have Russia face more than one front of war, have other nations feel threatened by Russian presence and Russian military aggression, and take them on militarily. And this might just be the case. This might be a case. These drones might be a way of somebody trying to, unidentified as yet, but with pro-Ukrainian tendencies, to trigger a panic button into the entire conflict and have NATO as a unity respond to Russia and turn this war into a, instead of just a Ukraine versus Russia war, into a NATO versus Russia war, which will also then draw in US military into this conflict. So my assumption is that these drones are a way to try and expand the conflict into larger zones and having more nations and more resources embedded into it, rather than just what is available to Ukraine and Zelensky himself.
Right, that's really insightful, Shruti. Thank you always for joining us and sharing your insight. Always